Hey everyone, welcome back to the Outcomes Rocket. I'm so excited to kick off another episode of the Code Green series with Deloitte, a life sciences and healthcare cyber podcast series, where we're covering some of the latest in cybersecurity and trends in the space that you should be thinking about and concerned with. Today, I have the privilege of hosting two outstanding leaders from the organization. First, I want to introduce you to Michael Crowthers. He is the managing director at Deloitte & Touche. And I also want to welcome Chris Knackstedt to the podcast. He's the managing director with Deloitte & Touche's cyber and strategic risk practice. Gentlemen, welcome to the podcast. It's so great to have you here.
Likewise. Great to be here, Saul.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us.
Hey, listen, I'm so excited to have you on. There has been so much changing in this space that the conversation that we have prepped for today is really a great one. You know, before we kick things off though, tell us what got you into the space, what got you started and interested in cyber, and tell us a little bit about your particular interest in it.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to get us started, Chris. So for me, Saul, as part of my managing director role at Deloitte, part of what I lead for our client services is what we brand as trustworthy AI compliance and governance for life sciences and healthcare. And so what got me involved in this space is the area I play within life sciences has a lot to do with health regulations. How do companies develop their medical devices or bring their drugs to market in a compliant way? And how do systems that support getting those therapies to patients, how do those systems stay compliant? And so naturally, as AI hit the scene many, many years ago, part of that technology stack became important to understand how do we make sure we govern it? How are we making sure that that technology is safe for the public and it's safe for the organization? So I guess it was a bit organic for me in the way I started to get involved.
That's great. No, it's a really important place in the industry that you're involved in. So thanks for sharing that, Michael. Chris, how about you?
So for me, I started my career, not to date myself, about 25 years ago, actually working to build out machine learning and statistical solutions to help with a number of different problems. So I started my career as a data scientist, using a lot of these new and emerging technologies in order to build solutions for clients. As I continued to progress in my career, I found myself at Deloitte working in the cybersecurity practice and continuing to build really interesting solutions using AI, but also got engaged on the other side of the table with working with clients to help them understand some of the new and novel risks that are emerging on the back of some of these technologies and helping them identify how to put safeguards in place so that they can continue to use these tools and build them out in a secure fashion without stifling innovation.
Yeah, super cool. Thanks for sharing that, Chris. So I really love the mix of backgrounds that you both bring to the table. Let's go ahead and get started with the first question. What are the biggest hurdles to adoption of AI that organizations are facing today?
I can take the first pass at that, Saul. So interestingly, we actually have some data that I can share behind this question that I'll speak to. So according to our Q4 publication of the State of Generative AI in the Enterprise, which was published back in January of this year, so it's somewhat recent, and it surveys over about 2,700 cross-industry executives across the globe. One of the biggest hurdles identified and one of the questions we had asked is exactly this question. What are some of those obstacles? While it's not the number one or not the only hurdle, the top one was governance, ethics, and compliance. And so some of the data we received behind that is that about 38% of executives, the worries around complying with the regulations that are ever changing as a barrier to developing, scaling, and deploying generative AI. Of those executives, about 23% believe their organization is prepared with respect to AI risk and governance. So really a large gap in terms of companies that feel like they're ready to take this on. And then the last data point I'll provide, Saul, is within that same report, a lot of these organizations that don't feel like they're ready for risk and governance around AI, they're actually expecting governance and compliance issues to take about 12 to 24 months to resolve, which can obviously further delay value realization and adoption if it's not addressed or accelerated appropriately.
Yeah, that's a big gap and certainly something that we need to be thinking about. Chris, you were about to jump in there. Go for it.
Yeah, no, I mean, so I would echo everything that Mike had mentioned. And I think that things that we're seeing in the market and things that we're seeing with some of our clients definitely circumvent around some of the uncertainty from a regulatory standpoint. Also, to combine that with some of just the practical hurdles that are taking place. And those have to do with just being able to bring in folks who truly understand these technologies and the literacy around using these technologies and building out these technologies. And then also the uncertainty around some of the various risks that these technologies are bringing. And from an organizational standpoint, both from a regulatory standpoint and then from a practical standpoint, how do you set an initial position around our organization and how we would want to ethically use these tools and what types of use cases we think are the best use cases based on our individual risk posture and what it is that we're willing to take on by way of risk?
Yeah, some really great questions for organizations to consider. I mean, those timelines are big. If you can't adopt these technologies, if it's going to take you 12 to 24 months, that's problematic if your competition's moving faster. So really, what is driving the focus on AI risk management for organizations, and why is this important?
I'll start off with this one. And I think it is somewhat of an extension of the last question, right? And, I'll start by saying 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago, November of 2022, generative AI became a thing in the market, right? And there were a number of different activities that were taking place in the market, a number of new technologies that were coming about that really caused the beginning of this revolution that we're in right now. Shortly after some of those new technologies were released, we're also seeing surfacing a lot of stories around issues and risks that people were facing using these really new and nascent technologies, right? And so I think that really spurred another focus, or at least a renewed focus in risk management around some of these new technologies. I think that a lot of leaders, security leaders and risk management leaders across organizations had somewhat of a knee-jerk reaction when some of these new generative AI technologies first hit in the market, and they forbid organizations and users within the organization to use a lot of these new technologies, but then quickly realized that if they don't start innovating and they don't start using some of these new solutions, they're going to lose a competitive advantage. And so with that, as I mentioned, a lot of renewed focus has come about with risk management, particularly as it relates to how do we securely and with trust adopt some of these new technologies and start bringing them into our business safely and securely.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, it's sort of that idea that AI won't make your company go out of business, but another company using AI will make you go out of business, right? I think that's a solid point. And look, I think it's a key area of focus for a lot of organizations. If I'm a company trying to get my arms around how I get started or what I prioritize first, what lessons learned would you share on this topic?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that I would say, sorry, I'll go ahead and jump right in again too, and then Mike, I'll stop hogging the conversation. But yeah, no, I'd say the first thing that I would say is that AI risk management is not a mandate of just your cybersecurity team. It's not a mandate of just your legal team or your compliance team. It really requires a shared responsibility across the entire organization. And so being able to integrate and coordinate appropriately across your business, and this includes not just the people that are in charge of protecting AI within your business, but this also includes the teams that are responsible for developing AI in a secure and trustworthy manner, and also those that are going to be consuming the AI. So I think, across those major stakeholders, also to include your executive body, as well as your regulatory body for those organizations that are regulated deeply, I think that they need to understand and embrace the shared responsibility for AI across their business.
Yeah,
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, Michael, over it.
Yeah, I think adding to what Chris mentioned as well, from a lessons learned perspective, 2 words really come to mind for me: integration and harmonization. And so I've seen a lot of companies kickstart AI governance and controls by isolating it from other technologies, and then they end up creating standalone governance processes, standalone governance controls. And listen, when people were reacting to November of 2022, as Chris said, when generative AI became a thing, it was understandable the way a lot of organizations try to quickly get something in place. But the reality is that while there are net new risks and new controls that need to be dealt with for AI, there are many, I'd say a large majority of existing processes and tools that apply across the risk domains, whether you're talking about security, privacy, quality within the GXP space and life sciences, that will still apply for AI. So the key message from my perspective is don't reinvent the wheel in areas you don't need to. Leverage what you have, supplement that, and then yes, where necessary, that additional 20 to 30 to 40% new things and new controls that need to be created, go ahead and add them in a way that can be seamlessly integrated.
Yeah, a great process and a great perspective, guys. Thank you very much for the insights there. Look, the other thing that's come up is AI agents. I mean, from my time at JP Morgan Health in San Francisco in January to now, it seems like it has accelerated. Talk to us about AI agents. They seem all the buzz. Are there different risks that get introduced with AI agents?
Yes, certainly all the buzz. Quite a number of conversations and questions come up. So the short answer, Saul, is yes, there are certainly different risks that are introduced with AI agents or agentic AI. Many of them, by the way, that organizations are really starting to get their arms around, right? Not everything is quite honestly solved at the moment. Now, in some cases, some of the existing risks like hallucination, ethical use are amplified or could be amplified with agentic AI. Some of the new risks that are specific to agentic AI that we're seeing surface include examples like runaway AI agents, where agents might perform malicious tasks or maybe obfuscate steps that were designed into the workflow and hide their footsteps. One of the areas that companies are really trying to understand and get their arms around is how do you best monitor performance of these use cases and models when you had an agentic or multi-agent solution? It was a little bit easier, not to say it was easy, but a little bit easier when you were talking about kind of a single model or single use case. This obviously, like I said, amplifies it. A few other examples of some of the new risks is misaligned learning. Now, you could argue that this is not a new risk, but in this particular case, systems might learn the wrong behaviors. So an example might be where you're using AI to drive, or agentic AI to drive an end-to-end back office finance process or activity. Some inconsistencies in calculation could be undetectable on a transaction by transaction basis. And so you wouldn't really detect it until enough time passes and the damage is already done. So that's one area. And then maybe one more new area I'll leave you with is context untraceability and forensics. So that's where autonomous actions and nested permissions might lead to what we would consider blurry accountability.
That is certainly some great examples and things to be concerned about. So these technologies definitely have to be taken seriously as we consider their adoption. Chris, you were about to jump in, please.
Yeah, no, again, like I couldn't emphasize the things that Mike said enough. To pile on to that, I would just say that plainly, one of the premise of secure and trustworthy AI development is to consider having the human in the loop, right? And ensure that you're building things in such a way so that there is some human intervention, both in the development and the use of AI. Principally, when we start talking about AI agents, the idea is to take the human out of the loop in many cases. And so, that results in a number of issues just in itself. As we start giving more and more autonomy and decision rights to AI that were once held by humans, you now have to start thinking about some of these other issues around agent monitoring and agent behavioral evaluations to ensure that those tasks and those activities that you're now giving to these digital employees, you can monitor them with the same type of visibility and scrutiny that you were once monitoring your human employees with.
Yeah, some great points there as well, Chris. Deloitte's always putting out some great thought leadership on these topics. I'm sure we'll have a report or two to attach to this because this is tip of the iceberg on so many of these things. So definitely exciting we're covering them. Look, if you guys can predict the future, what do you think the headline is for this year in trustworthy and secure AI?
Chris, would you like me to take that one first?
Yeah, go ahead and pile on with a couple of other opinions, I'm sure.
So while I do not have a crystal ball, what I do when I think about what this year has in store and what I'm recommending for most organizations to focus on is I would frame it as the year of governance tech enablement. So obviously tech enablement of governance, controls, monitoring is not new for 2025. But I do think more and more companies, in fact, we're seeing more and more companies looking to procure and implement off-the-shelf solutions around AI governance to really help assist in the automation of monitoring, managing the risk assessments, managing the inventory of AI use cases better. And I think part of that tipping point for this year and why I think that is and should be a big focus for companies is, at least in life sciences and healthcare, to a large extent, there was still a lot of experimentation and dabbling in 2024. There's obviously exceptions to that. Certainly, there's examples of companies that have been really aggressively driving AI at scale. But I think now that companies are really looking to get past 5 to 10 use cases and really have it become embedded in part of how their organization gets work done and does business, it's going to be a necessity to have technology help look after and monitor how these models and these solutions are performing. So that's why I really think it's going to be a big year for that space.
Thank you for that. Yeah, thanks, Michael. Chris?
No, that's a great perspective. In fear of providing, the last response to one of these questions is like your typical consultant's answer, I would say that some of the things that we're going to be talking about a year from now may not even be on our radar right now. With the way that these technologies are progressing and evolving and maturing, I think that the types of use cases that organizations now are entertaining with the use of AI and generative AI are going to be far different in a year, because I just think that the products themselves, the technologies, and a lot of the advancements that are taking place right now are going to spawn new solutions that can do things that we're not even talking about right now. And so a year from now, with just as rapidly as this space is progressing and the revolution that we're in with all of the innovation that's taking place and all of the research and development that's going into this domain, there could be a new host of risks that are emerging in 12 months that we don't even know anything about right now.
Yeah, for sure. You can't fall asleep on this, right? When you think you got it figured out, the new stuff's coming out. And so we definitely have to be mindful. So great warning there for all of us to be humble about our approach with these things. Chris and Michael, appreciate you guys so much. Look, we could keep going, but we do have a limited time. I would love to give you both just an opportunity to give us a closing thought, and then we could close out our session today.
Yeah, so I would just say that as it relates to AI risk management, my parting words of wisdom are, don't forget where you come from. I say this from a cybersecurity standpoint. Organizations have spent decades putting controls and safeguards in place in order to protect technology ecosystems in and across their business. At the end of the day, AI is IT. And so as you begin thinking about a plan and a strategy around protecting your AI, start with the foundations of all the good cyber hygiene and risk management hygiene that you already have in place. And then from there, think about what you might need to do in order to augment or extend it in order to take account for some of the newer risks and vectors that are now emerging in some of these unique technology implementations that are coming about with AI and generative AI.
Thanks for that one, Chris. Michael?
Yeah, Chris, I'm going to take a page out of your book and re-emphasize that point. I think for a lot of companies that might just be getting started on their AI strategy and therefore just getting started and thinking about AI safety, governance, and controls, I think forward momentum is really the key measure. Like I said, it could be overwhelming trying to figure out, what do I do first? What do I prioritize? How do I get this all tackled quickly? I think if you can just kind of chip away and keep driving forward momentum, to Chris's point, building that foundation and then expanding upon it as you grow and implement and realize your AI strategy, you're going to be moving in the right direction.
Thank you for that, Michael. What a great way to conclude this podcast with Michael Crowthers, Managing Director at Deloitte & Touche, and also Chris Knackstedt, Managing Director with Deloitte & Touche's Cyber and Strategic Risk Practice, all part of this Code Green series with Deloitte Life Sciences and Healthcare Cyber podcast series on the Outcomes Rocket. Make sure you check out the show notes where we'll leave all the additional information that you'll need to get in touch with the Deloitte crew on ways that you could partner to make your organization safer. Just want to say thank you both, Michael and Chris, for joining us.
Thank you for the opportunity, Saul.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.